but specific content, not the blunt force trauma thing with RCD. And it can, I just saw a half-naked woman throwing money at me. It threw me off.
It's April 30th, 2025, and today's Ask and Praxis will be Copilot Readiness is Content Governance. What are we going to talk about today? So today it's we're going to start with what is Copilot Readiness, and then we're going to go into what is content governance. And then we'll sort of talk about how those things are very similar. Then we'll talk about what business problem are you trying to solve so that we can talk about how that's related to what you need to do. A Copilot's readiness strategy, restricted content discovery that Todd's going to go over because it has PowerShell involved, and you know how he loves that. And this is me turning over a new leaf since our 5-year anniversary when I realized that we try to shut him down and we were not going to do that anymore. And then finally, Mark will talk about Purview automating Copilot restrictions. All right, so let's get started. Derek, tell us about Copilot Readiness.
Oh, this is me.
That's you, dude.
All right.
Chop, chop. I'm the one who's a mess today, not you.
I'm never this early. I'm never this early in the slides.
That's true.
I'm here filing my nails. You know, I'm just getting ready, doing my little Zen thing. All right. Anyway, sorry. So what is Copilot Readiness? So at its core, Copilot Readiness is really about assessing the security, the privacy, and the governance and the compliance risks for how Copilot can shine a spotlight on these things. This is a lot of this is the same conversations that we were having years ago when search got better. And search or delve, for instance, started showing up all of this content. So it's really about figuring out what do you have in place already and where can we fix that. So it's also about ensuring that the content is in the right place with the right permissions so that we have the controls so that people can't see the things that they're not supposed to see. Because we're now, search is like, we had like a magnifying glass, and now we've got a giant spotlight on our content because we've got this AI engine that can now iterate over the entire tenant and provide a lot of useful information. It's also about making sure that you or your organization, what tools you're going to use and what tools you're going to support. So, for instance, are you recommending Microsoft 360 or what's it called now? Copilot Chat?
Yeah, I think Copilot Chat. It was Biz Chat. Yeah. I actually don't know what it's named again now.
But might have changed this morning.
Exactly. Or you're going to support Copilot Studio. How are you going to integrate agents? Because there's not just one size fits all for Copilot. And lastly, it is about making sure that your users have the appropriate skills and the training to use AI responsibly. And, whether that be the questions that you ask or how to best teach them how to use prompts, how to make better prompts to get the results that they're asking for so that they don't get frustrated.
Awesome. Well, that is definitely a good summary of what we think of as Copilot Readiness. All right, Patrick, over to you. And I have a feeling you're a little bit more awake. What is content governance?
Content governance? Well, it's what we always think of as information architecture. I think we could do content governance equals information architecture, which encompasses many things, which I'm showing here on the slide. Having good. I just lost all my words. Maybe I'm not more awake. I'm the old one who needs the nap. Yeah, I just completely lost my train of thought. Okay, information architecture. It is what makes good content governance. So when we're thinking about information architecture, we think about everything from naming conventions to content types, permissioning, how content is organized in your site lists, your site columns, lists and libraries, all those things that we pull together to better hone our content to make it more accessible to our users is what we talk about when we talk about governance. One of the key things that's coming up most recently that we've been talking a lot about is lifecycle. Making sure that our documents have lifecycle on them helps make not only the sites better and your search better, it will come into play when we're talking about AI and Copilot and all these other things to make sure that the information that's being put out there is the most current and accessible.
Yeah, I think that is super, super key is to the honing of that information. All right, so now that we've sort of defined both of those terms, we can kind of look at this as, Copilot and search and how they are related, right? So back in the day when, people were like, oh, search is going to solve all our problems and we don't have to organize our content anymore. That wasn't the case. We all knew it wasn't the case because we had the same problem. Search in those days just showed you that things existed. If you didn't have good information architecture, good content governance, good lifecycle management, search would show you things that you may not wanted to have surfaced for those people because you didn't have the right permissions, or you had things in places where they shouldn't be, or you didn't remove things that should have been removed. So we definitely had that problem with search. And now we have the same exact problem with Copilot. They're making it like it's this brand new problem, but it's this same problem. The only difference is where search just showed you it existed, Copilot shows you what's in it. So it's a maybe a little bit more egregious problem in the fact that, like, just seeing that it exists and the fact that somebody could open it was sort of one thing, but now that content is actually getting sourced into the answers as if it's the truth. And it's a lot harder to tell that it came from something that wasn't necessarily the source of truth. And so I think that's why, we as Simpraxis have been having a strong reaction to this Copilot readiness thing and kind of, not brushing it off, but sort of being like, this is the same problem. This is a problem we've always been having. It's just getting a different label, and it has maybe different ramifications, but it's just the same problem. So essentially what we're saying.
And I think Casper added a very important extra point. If it can't find it, it'll make it up.
Yeah.
So you at least search can't. If you can't find something through search, you don't find something. If you can't find something through Copilot, it may tell you some things that aren't quite right.
Yeah, that's an extremely valid point. Good add there, Casper. All right. So Mark, this is one thing that you have been talking a lot about. What business problem are you trying to solve? Because
jabber. You can't stop me from talking about it.
Yeah, a lot of people want to throw Copilot at things without maybe having a reason to do so. So why don't you go ahead?
And frankly, this is like any technology. Anything from something small to something which I think will be transformative, like AI is, or will be. There's this they're missing out FOMO problem. People, we've got to start using Copilot because everyone else is using it, and if we don't use it, we're going to fall behind. Behind what is my question back to that. So really, you want to start thinking about, and what are the problems you're trying to solve? What are you trying to accomplish by using AI and Copilot? And it's interesting because these questions or these thoughts are very, very similar to the questions or thoughts that we ask or talk about when we're building a good information architecture. So are you trying to enable your entire organization or just specific processes? We don't add metadata and content types and Power Automate flows to something if it's trivial. We add them to things that need focus and need to have a better, more rigor or more capability, and we have to identify that stuff very carefully. Same thing with Copilot. If you're just saying, well, let's give everybody Copilot because everyone will be better at everything, that's pretty naive, because it's like handing everybody a chainsaw and calling them a lumberjack. Not necessarily the case.
If you're a surgeon.
Or a surgeon, sure, chainsaw and surgeon, that goes right together. A tree surgeon, that's what they call those people. They do.
That's
I know.
A thing.
They use very small scalpels, though.
Yes.
So if you're going to go broad with Copilot, which is a different approach than going narrow, but if you're going to go broad, is the risk of oversharing and exposing sensitive content worth the potential reward for people having access to all of that content, or generative results based on that content. As Julie said, Copilot is going to find out what's inside documents, and it's going to give you back answers based on what's inside those. So if you're an organization that has a lot of concern with security, a lot of concern with oversharing, a lot of concern with permissioning, you really want to think about what risks you're going to put yourself in place for. Todd's going to talk about restricted content discovery, which is sort of the blunt instrument to block some content off from Copilot access, but it also affects search. So there's some side effects from making some of these business decisions in what you're in trying to figure out what problems you're going to try and solve. If you're going to go broad, if you're going to give Copilot to a lot of people, how are you going to train them? How are you going to teach them what they should be using Copilot for, but also even more importantly, how to use it well, which is the next bullet. Be realistic about what prompting is. Prompting is hard. Searching is hard. Most of the people I know are not great searchers.
Only good prompting is hard.
And not being a great searcher means that you're probably not going to be a great prompter either. If you struggle with finding the right results with I'll say Google or Bing, you're probably going to have even more trouble coming up with good prompts that are actually going to be useful for you to solve some sort of business problem. So you need to make sure that you're realistic about what people are going to be able to get to ask Copilot for to get good and valuable results back. And then as with any content exercise that we go through, you need to be thinking about what metrics did you have in place ahead of time. How have you been measuring whether people are good at something, so that if you make this change, you give them Copilot, how will you know that they're better at it now? If you don't have any pre-trial or rollout metrics, then you have nothing to compare to understand if there's anything good going on afterwards. I've seen a bunch of organizations do a trial with Copilot and do things like give it to all the executives, but have no metrics. So now the executives can play with it, but what are you trying to solve? What are you asking them to do so that you can gather information to understand what success looks like? And so think very, very carefully as you're trying to identify how you're going to apply Copilot, where you're going to expect people to be using it, how you're going to know if it's moved the needle somehow.
Yeah, I think there's an aspect of this that is Copilot where it's just sort of helping you do sort of some day-to-day things like write an email or get started on a blank Word document, write some fake content, which I use it for a lot. That's my primary thing. Make me demo documents, demo content, demo JSON files, mock data for things. That I find it incredibly useful for. And I think that could be useful to everyone, right? So that piece of it for sure, but it's when the problem I think becomes more when people then say, okay, well, I'm pretty good at doing these few things that are just to help me in my day-to-day, like getting stuff done. And now they're starting to ask questions of the environment and expecting those bits of work to be done correctly. And you have to know a lot more about what you're doing. Mike Dixon, I think you made a comment while Mark was talking about good prompting is hard, right? So that was
bad prompting is much easier.
So much easier.
Here, give me some of that stuff over here so that I can use it for the thing.
Caleb, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to share something that I just recently saw that I think goes to a lot of what you guys are talking about. We're working on our journey at the company I work for, and we've slowly been allowing some individuals in the business to have access to Copilot Studio for specific use cases that can work with content that's just in SharePoint and OneDrive.
Yep.
And we've got a guy who was a developer before he got really aligned with the business, and now really knows the business well too. And he's been developing us a Copilot Studio. So we're in insurance, for those that don't know, and we have hundreds of underwriters and agents that need to be able to understand, can they write a policy, or what are the relative merits of different things. And he's taken all of their underwriting guidelines and their handbooks and that sort of thing and put them into a repository, and trained the Copilot Studio on it, and then has thrown questions at it that are the types of things that the underwriters and agents would be asking, that they would normally call somebody within the business and say, hey, I want to know about gap insurance versus this other type of insurance that we sell. What's the right thing to offer to this person for the type of need that they have, and what are the pros and cons? And that becomes a hour-long conversation between two people. And he was able to throw that same type of question at a well-crafted, multiple prompt focused Copilot Studio, and within 15 seconds have all the answers with references back to the documents that they needed.
Nice.
And there is no way that they could have used search to get to that, because even if they searched for gap insurance across the set of documents, they'd get a set of documents and they still have to know what's inside those documents. And so Copilot is helping them distill down and get to what they need.
Yeah, that's a great
stuff.
That's a great example of a very targeted, focused. You
Yep.
know what subset of content that agent or Copilot Studio is going to look at, and so it's more controlled. You're saying, okay, let's make this content more useful for the people who use it, which is different than let's take a tool and aim it at everything, like what we do with search.
100%. You're grounding it in that specific content. I
Absolutely.
have some demos that I'm working on for Microsoft for something we're building, and absolutely experiencing exactly what you're talking about, Caleb. When you target it, so this is SharePoint agents, but you're doing it a little bit more robustly with Copilot Studio. But SharePoint agents is the baby step of that, and I think incredibly powerful right out of the box. And then to your point, you can take Copilot Studio and take it to the next level, or write declarative agents with some custom code on it and go even further into the pro code mode. Tommy, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I would like to counter argue against Mark using FOMO, because when you look at what you just did, and I'm over exaggerating, of course, but by bringing up oversharing, there's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. What's oversharing? If Copilot exposes a threat that the business is done because someone shares information, that tells me that someone did F up before that.
Yeah.
It should never be the case anyways, because we all know search does the same. The permissions are just wrong.
Yeah.
So what is the exact consequence of oversharing? I talk a lot with customers about that, and from my point of view, that's the same emotions like FOMO. Totally get that. It's the same point like, oh, there is something to be afraid of. Yeah. Everyone has a contract with the company. You're not allowed to share information anyways. We all know there is super, super sensible information that is not good if it's only covered by law. You get that. But that piece of information shouldn't be overshared anyways.
Right.
Yeah,
That's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, what this Copilot Readiness is doing is showing the gaps in people's information architecture, in my mind. It's the gaps in their content.
Literacy in the using of the tools.
Governance.
Search, Copilot, agree.
Yeah. And you're right, the same stuff would have been visible by search, but all you would find is that it exists, like Julie said, not what was in it. And that's probably the bigger scary thing. The FOMO piece is we should use Copilot because everybody else is. And I think that's a crappy business decision-making process. I think my point on that previous slide was just make sure that you know what problems you're trying to solve, as opposed to saying that there might be a problem and maybe this is the tool that'll solve it.
Yeah, like Caleb's problem was
just like Caleb. Yeah, it's exactly what he said. They knew what they were after, and so they could position it in a way that they could get that insight from all that content. So super important.
What we're finding as IT is that it's not just enough to have good governance and good information architecture, but you also have to have good business partners who understand who understand the business side of things, but also are technical enough to understand how to work with the AI and how to teach the AI about the business.
Well, and to Taylor's, or Tara, sorry, Tara, I don't know how to say your name. To
I
Tara's
get
point,
that all the time.
that was just blit. So it's part of, how do we enable our end users to then come back to us and say, oh, I think that there's something that's being overshared. I think that there's a problem here. There's something that we need to solve. Make sure that we're tightening up those feedback loops, because all of this falls apart if nobody says it. And it's just like, if you see something, say something. Your digital estate needs to be a collaborative, ever evolving place that you're working on together, not just the security people, but also the end users who are seeing things that happen in the real world.
One of the promises from Microsoft is that as we buy Copilot licenses, SharePoint Advanced Management is going to come along for the ride with that. And while it's not out yet, it's supposedly on the horizon that we'll be able to find all that oversharing stuff and at least have better line of sight than we've had so far in terms of reporting off of sites that are overshared.
Yeah, those tools do help. I don't think they go far enough, and I'm going to use that as a segue to jump into this slide. So having done a couple of Copilot readiness exercises with clients, these are the kinds of things that I think you need to be doing. This is not Microsoft's list, but this is the stuff that I've seen be helpful. One of the things is just understanding what sites you have and how they're being used. Believe it or not, most people have no idea what that looks like. They know they've got a big, long list. And just thinking about where sensitive stuff might be is a very good starting point. Like, oh, we have a board of directors site. Huh, I'll bet there's some stuff in there that everyone should see. Let's make sure that that's the case. It can start with just simple stuff like that. But obviously, if you've got a lot of sites, you've got to do some real analysis. It's not just eyeballing the list. Sensitivity labels, if they're configured correctly, can help a lot with this. You can apply sensitivity labels at the site level or at the individual pieces of content level. I've seen both both approaches. I think at the site level makes more sense. If this site is likely to contain highly confidential content, let's apply that label to it so that we're sure we've got this sort of force field around that site. And Copilot respects those. The biggest thing by far is permission checking. And permission checking is not just who has access to this particular site, but it's analyzing all of those sharing links that people have been creating for years and seeing who's actually redeemed them and what they have access to. Sometimes it's absolutely intentional and it's absolutely correct. I shared a document way down deep in a document library with Julie, and she's supposed to have added access for that, and that's all good. Or maybe I shared it with Jack and I clicked on Julie by accident, and Julie's edited that file by accident. And that's a real problem, and it could be a very important document that Julie shouldn't see. So you really need to dig deeper into your permissions and look at all of the links that people have made and see who they've been redeemed by and what they give people access to. This broken inheritance thing can be just an unbelievable mess. You also, sort of to go back up a little bit to the sensitivity labels thing, you want to be thinking as much as you can about what to you indicates a location that is of concern. I'm saying of concern instead of having as a sensitivity label applied to it, but what is your definition of concerning content? Is it a site level? Is it a document level? Is it a folder level? And how can you make sure that you're doing a good job there? Next thing is make sure that you don't have a lot of old stuff out there. If you're creating a lot of versions of documents like, file version 2, file version 3, file version 3 final approved by Derek, then you've got many, many different examples of the same thing in different states, some of which are going to contradict each other. If this is, again, your digital estate is, if it's a mess, then you're going to get a bunch of messy results, some of which are going to be wrong. And then there are third-party tools like our friends over at Orchestry who are building a Copilot Readiness portal that start to give you a dashboard for these kinds of things. In the couple instances where I've had to do this work, I've written a lot of, yes, you guessed it, Todd, PowerShell to, crank through sites and look for things with labels. I've used ShareGate to do inventories. I've used Orchestry to look at places where content is inactive and maybe we should lock it down. There are lots and lots of different tools you can use, but you really have to think about which tools are going to get you to the place that your organization needs to be. And I'll tell you, having, again, done this a couple of times, if these particular clients had better information architectures in place in the first place, this would have been a lot easier. I had to do a lot of stuff where everything is stored in the documents library, and maybe there's some important stuff in one folder way down deep. And that is not a good information architecture to try and be putting controls on. So.
You may be talking about it later, but Tara asked, does Purview let us check the links? I think she was talking about the investigate links to go.
Yeah, the link investigation. No, and there really aren't any good tools in the platform itself. The SAM stuff is starting to get to it, but I found that didn't get me very far, and I ended up writing some PowerShell to actually spin through and look at the labels and see, each label sort of wrapped with metadata and the people who have redeemed it, and you sort of have to dig into that, and it's a bit of work.
On that note, Steve mentioned that he's had good luck with Varonis Compliance Manager. I don't have any experience with it, so I can't speak to that, but a good tip potentially. Yeah. All right, moving along, Todd. We're going to give you your time. Go ahead.
I'll try to blast through this one so I don't keep people too late. So if you find that your organization doesn't have the information architecture that you wish that it had, and you've seen seen stuff in the slides here that make you long for better setup, there is one way to kind of keep Copilot's hands out of specific sites. And that's with a thing called RCD, or Restricted Content Discovery. And basically, this is a filter that sits at the end of the search pipeline that says, should I expose this to search or Copilot? So this was originally developed. We've talked a couple times about the Delve explosion of what's this file? This was part of that whole remediation for that. But it gives you the ability to tag a site and say, index this site and, give everybody access to this site, but don't have the contents of this site show up in organization-wide searches or Copilot Business Chat, which is the main Copilot chat. Couple of things that it does not do. It doesn't change any permissions. Again, it's just a filter at the end of the search pipeline. It doesn't stop document Copilot chat, so you can still go into a site that has RCD enabled and go to a Word document and say, summarize this document. If you can find the document, Copilot can do stuff. It does not impact Purview or eDiscovery, again, because it's just a search thing. So Caleb's asking, does RCD work with sensitivity labels? I believe yes. I have not tested it, but I believe that it does. And Casper's saying, so kind of the big brother of don't index. Well, that's the thing. It does index it because it does still work with eDiscovery and Purview. It just doesn't expose it. So it's just like one last filtering thing. So kind of like, and I'm preaching to the choir here with Casper, but if you think about how search works, you've got a term and it goes out and looks at the content and then looks out at the metadata and then it looks to see, does the person have permission to this document? That's kind of where it fits in. It fits in similar to that before it exposes it. The documentation now is kind of fractured on what you need to enable this. It says you need a Copilot license and a SAM license, but like Caleb mentioned earlier, Microsoft has been making noises about how it's all going to fall under the Copilot license. So you may see it if your admin, the account you're logged in as when you try to set this, has a Copilot license, you may be able to set this. If not, you may need a SAM license to set this per site. You can do this with PowerShell, so you can use the SPO module to download that, and that gives you a ton of PowerShell. I'd love to go through every command lovingly and tell you all the great things that it does. But basically, you've got set SPO site where you set this as a property on the site. And then you've got some commandlets that give you reports on which sites that this is enabled on and things like that. But this is a very blunt hammer, a very blunt tool to keep things from showing up in search and in M365. And all throughout the Microsoft documentation is littered with, don't do this unless you need to. Remember, this messes up search and Copilot. But if you do have some really sensitive stuff that you haven't gone through and done all the things that Mark talked about in the last slide, and you don't want things to show up that shouldn't, this is one way to keep them from showing up.
Yeah, it feels like maybe a mini remediation that could be done if you've already let Copilot out of the box and you want to remediate a little bit before you take the time to do all the real work. This maybe is a starting point, at least to take those super sensitive places and lock them down a little bit. All right,
we actually used it at one of the clients I'm working with ahead of time. These are the sites we're scared as hell about. Let's just block them.
Yeah.
Because RCD is basically don't let Copilot in here at all. So so Caleb's question about does it work with sensitivity labels? It's a far more of a blunt instrument than that. It's lock this site. It is the big brother of don't index. It's keep indexing, just don't show it to Copilot.
Yeah.
So if you're inside the site, you can still search in there. But if you're outside of that site, it actually blocks searching and Copilot. I think it's a bad solution to have available because it makes you complacent about the mess that you've got inside that site to start with.
Does the data get removed? So if you had it and the data was in it and used to reason against something, does the data then eventually get removed so that any context that was inferred?
So that's an interesting question. The documentation says no, it does not get removed. So if you had a conversation, there you go. So if you had a conversation with this and then somebody came in and turned this on, it's still in there.
Yeah, I mean, if you've asked a question and you've gotten an answer, you have that answer, right? The footnote might not, the little number isn't going to get you there anymore, potentially. But
I guess I'm more thinking like if the data that was in a site was used to like create a reasoning that included content that shouldn't be seen, and it was being overshared, like the salaries for the executives, for instance. Right.
I think once the horse is out of the barn, it's out of the barn, and
that's sort of my thought.
It's the next time you look for the horse, he's going to be back in the barn. So it doesn't do anything retroactively. It's just like putting up a lead shield around that site.
Right.
Tommy?
Understanding question: does the SharePoint agent within the site still work? So the people that have permissions, you said something like you can search still in the site scope. Does the local agent still work?
Yes.
Yes, I believe that's correct. The search index doesn't stop happening. It's that it's no longer available for use outside of the site in Copilot or
it's scoped to the sites. Okay.
Yeah. So the RCD is scoped at the org level. So it pulls it off. If you do if you go to office.com or the SharePoint homepage and do a search there, it doesn't show up, but like Mark said, at the site level, it will.
Yeah. So it sounds like that is the answer. Go ahead, Tommy.
The Copilot agent in my site collection still works for users that have permission on the site collection.
Yeah.
Should.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
As of a few weeks ago, that was definitely true.
We never know when these things are going to change.
But that's the intent. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right,
so
Mark,
I have now you on the record to say that.
Well, it's a recording now.
Yeah. I added my disclaimers. Okay, so I'll talk about this just briefly. I mean, Purview I think is becoming a more necessary tool set for a lot of organizations because of Copilot. And I don't think that's some sort of conspiracy plot thing on Microsoft's part. It's just that Purview starts to give you ways to manage how long content's around, who can get to it, how it should be treated, adding watermarks for sensitivity labels. There are all kinds of things that that Purview supports that are starting to just become more useful in this context. So if you haven't looked at Purview and you're concerned about the content that Copilot is going to get to, you ought to be looking at what those tool sets are to see if there's something there that you can use. Sensitivity labels, which I already talked about a little bit, are very helpful to prevent Copilot from seeing content, but specific content, not the blunt force trauma thing with RCD. And it can, I just saw a half-naked woman throwing money at me. It threw me off. You want to just think about how this can come into the picture. Yes, it might cost a little bit more money, but back to my first bullet on the what business problem are you trying to solve thing, how, what is the risk that you're opening yourself up to, and is it worth spending some bucks to reduce that risk? What are you concerned about? What is your organization about? If you're an organization of 10 people and everybody has access to everything, not a problem. If you're an insurance company like Caleb's, maybe a big problem.
I'm still lost on your previous comment. I don't even know how to talk right now. All right, I think that definitely covers the perfect. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I was going to say it actually feels like, from a maturity model perspective, which we talk about a lot, there's probably a lot of organizations that could take advantage of some of the features of Purview, but it was sort of this mythical thing out in the ether that only the more mature organizations were ready to embrace right away. And I think what we're seeing is that as these tools come out, even these organizations who probably always could take advantage of them but weren't in a maturity level where they were ready to take advantage of them are now sort of in that space where maybe this is going to be making more and more sense.
And in some cases in a sort of panic mode, right? Like, oh my God, you better turn on Purview because fear.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be that way. If you think things through, Copilot or Purview might be a part of that picture, but it doesn't have to be the panic move.
Exactly. All right, let's wrap this up for everybody, since we did have to go a little bit over some resources if you need them. Our next episode, May 14th, we're all at, a lot of us, Mark, Derek, Carrie, and myself are all at the Microsoft 365 Community Conference next week. So we will be doing a recap on May 14th for that. See us live at the places we've been talking about, the Community Conference, European Collaboration Summit a couple weeks after that. Tech-O-Rama is where Todd's going to be at, and then Derek and I will be in Seattle. And so that is where you can find us, and we look forward to seeing you next time on May 14th for our next Acts and Praxis. Thanks everybody for joining us and staying a little bit long. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask and Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.